Hello and welcome. This is the first lecture in a series of many you will be listening to this semester. Today we are going to be discussing the communication model. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to do three clear things. First of all, you should be able to identify each element of the communication model, define each of those elements, and then place them in their appropriate respective places throughout the model, relative to the other terms that we're going to be talking about. Let's first start out by being a little overwhelmed and taking a look at the model that we're going to end with. Here's the blank space, and now the model shows up. As you can see, there's a lot going on here. But when you think about it, when you are talking with another person, there is a lot going on. We are talking about a lot of things. We are doing a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on in your mind, and that is what we're talking about when we talk about the communication model. So let's, instead of starting with this complexity, let's take it apart. First off, let's just take everything away and start with the basics. When we start, the first thing that we need to talk about when we talk about communication is we have two people talking. Those two people are referred to as the communicator. Some textbooks refer to them as the source receiver. If you're in public speaking, it's referred to as the speaker audience. I prefer the term communicator because it seems to encompass everything that's actually going on, but the communicator is essentially an individual involved in communication, simultaneously sending and receiving messages. If you have a highlighter, highlight the word simultaneously. Take your pen, circle it, underline it. Make sure that you know that the word simultaneously is the most important word in this definition because it is. Without that word, you won't get credit. But the reason it's the most important word in the definition is because when we are interacting simultaneously. So now that we've got our two people, let's step back and add a little more to the model. The next word we're going to add is the channel, and the channel refers to the method or the medium through which a message travels. The medium used to transmit a message. It can be eye contact, it can be our hands, it can be the words that we're using, it can be the tone of our voice. There are many, many, many channels that we use when we communicate face-to-face. There are also many channels that we can use when we're not communicating face-to-face. For example, we can use the telephone, we can use a text message, we can use the television. There are all sorts of different channels that we can use. Every single one of them is very similar. It is the medium used to transmit a message. Now that we understand the channel, let's figure out what a message is. The message is actually a very simple idea that has a lot of complexity going on. And it's this. The message is a collection of symbols representing the sender's thoughts. So when you want to send something to another person, if you have something in your brain that you want to share with the other person, the first thing you have to do is take that idea and turn it into a message. And that message is this collection of symbols. Everything that we communicate is simply a symbol. That's all we do. We just share symbols and try to understand the symbols that the other people that we're communicating with are using. Once we get through the message, the next step is how do we get there? We've got the message, how did we get it, and how do we get it back from the message? Well, there are two ideas that are going on here. First is encoding. Encoding is this process of creating concrete symbols from abstract thoughts. So encoding is the process of taking the thoughts that are in your head, using your brain to code them, to turn them into these symbols, to say, okay, I know what I want this other person to know. What symbols can I use so that other person understands what I'm saying? Oftentimes we use language, but that means that we have to choose exactly the right words that are going to be understood by the other person. Often we also use things like our gestures, our hand gestures, or other things that we'll be talking about later throughout the semester as we talk more about those messages and those channels. The idea is that encoding is the process of taking those ideas and turning them into symbols, where decoding is the reverse of that process. Decoding is where we take those concrete symbols and turn them into abstract thoughts. So when we hear words, we take the words and we put them into our brains and we say, okay, what is that other person saying? Through the decoding process, we try and take all of those different messages from all of those different channels and figure out exactly what the message is, exactly what that other person is saying to us. Now that we've got encoding, we've encoded a message, we've decoded a message, there are two other concepts that we need to talk about. The first one is the concept of interference. And your textbook refers to interference typically as noise. I'm not a big fan of the word noise because to me noise implies sound. Interference is not always sound. It can be. If you've ever been to a rock concert and tried to have a conversation with the person next to you, you've experienced interference. Interference is simply anything that interferes with successful transmission or reception of the message. And it comes in two flavors. What I just described in the rock concert is external interference. That's where there are things going on in the world around us that prevent that message from getting through to us. Either it's too loud so we can't hear what the person's saying, or it's too dark so we can't see the other person. It's too cold so we're too busy shivering to understand what the other person's saying. That's all external interference. Internal interference, on the other hand, are the things that are going on in your brain while you are trying to either encode or decode the message. So if you think about it, if you've ever taken a foreign language class and early on when you're still trying to learn the language, there are problems where you're slow. You are trying to figure out, wait, what is the word in Spanish or French or German that means what I'm trying to say? That's part of internal interference. There are other parts of internal interference that are things like when you've got other things on your mind and you're just having a very hard time focusing. On the other hand, on the decoding side, we have things going on in our brains all the time that can prevent us from successfully understanding that message, from successfully receiving what that other person is trying to say. For example, you might have a test in your next class and you are struggling as hard as you can just to pay attention because you just can't focus on what's going on. You've got those things going on in your head. That's internal interference. There's one last concept that we need to add to this image, and that's the idea of the context or the situation. And the context or the situation refers to the physical, temporal, psychological aspects that affect interaction. Let's break that apart because this is kind of a long and complex definition. So what this means is everything that's going on around you, everything that influences what we say or what we do or how we understand the situation. So, for example, the physical aspect of the context is where you are. You're going to have, if you meet a friend out on the street, you're going to have a much shorter conversation with them if it's January and 10 degrees outside than you would if it were May and 72. So the physical aspect of the environment has an effect on what we say to each other, how long the conversation lasts, the social aspect. What is the relationship between the sender and the receiver? Let me tell you, the first day of class is when the students, to me, are the most cordial. They are the most upstanding, respectful citizens. The temporal, what time of day? We all interact differently when it's early in the morning versus when it's late at night or when it's in the afternoon. And then the psychological aspect. As I mentioned with internal or external interference, what's going on in our brain does have an effect on how we understand things. And that's what the psychological aspect is. The context is all of these things going on around us that either aid or harm our interaction, the interaction we have with other people. So now we come back to the model. We've got it all completely put together. This complex image that we started with at the beginning of the lecture now becomes much clearer. It's actually a pretty simple process. There's a lot going on, but it is pretty simple when we break it down and take it step by step. And now that you've seen the lecture, you should be able to identify the elements of the model, define each element, and then finally place those elements in their appropriate location relative to other terms. Like I said, this is the first lecture in a long series of lectures that are coming throughout the semester. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you missed something, the cool thing about putting stuff online is you can watch it again and again and again. Have a wonderful day.